As a group, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which this podcast was produced is within the unceded and traditional territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose relationship with the land continue to this day. We would also like to give thanks to all the ancestors, supernatural ones, hereditary leaders, matriarchs, and creatures big and small for looking after the rich resources and cultural teachings of this beautiful land. We ask you to take a moment to appreciate and give thanks to the land on which you stand as well. Thank you.
I'm your host, Krista, and welcome back to Let's Talk Access, a podcast mini-series focused on exploring access to mental health services in the Victoria, BC area. On this episode, we're going to follow Tamara, Sierra, and Joe as they record themselves doing their best to try and access mental health services. We specifically didn't give them any instructions on how to do that. The reality is, most of us have no idea how to start, and we wanted this audio to be as realistic as possible. They each had a bit of a different take on the assignment. However, Google was at the center of everything. Welcome to our virtual world. First up, we're going to hear from Tamara, who started by checking out what her insurance website had to offer. Turns out it was surprising for all of us.
So, I have insurance, and my insurance company has a website. So, something's got to give there. So, currently, I am on my computer. I have opened up all my work tabs, which is always terrifying to look at. So, under benefits search, I have plan information, ambulance services, dental accident, foot orthotics and orthopedic shoes, hearing devices, supplies and repairs, hospital accommodations and related services, medical equipment and supplies, medical tests, exams and miscellaneous items and services, compression garments, bandages and accessories, respiratory equipment, supplies and repairs, practitioner services, travel coverage, vision care products and services. None of this is what I want.
That was a lot of stuff, and she sounds frustrated. I get it. Before giving up, she's typing something else into the search bar.
Counseling services. Okay, let's look at that. Counseling services, reimbursement percentage. Counseling services have a combined limit of $900 per person per calendar year. What? That's nothing. $900. So right now my therapist costs me $120 to visit. So if we check the math, boys and girls, 900 divided by 120 is 7.5 visits. So that's not quite 2 months of therapy. Okay, so that's rendered under a registered psychologist. Same with psychology rendered by an industrial psychologist is not a benefit I have. Counseling rendered by a registered counselor is not a benefit I have, not by a social worker or a psychoanalyst or marriage and family therapy, parent training, referral to a nutritionist or lawyer or accountant. Okay, this is only if I go to a registered psychologist.
Okay, I'm going to pop in for a minute because not only did that sound like a lot of options were off the table in terms of who she could access, but what even are the differences? Next season, we'll find out.
So now I just have to find out if I can see a psychologist. Or I don't know. How do you go see a psychologist? Let's type that into Google. How do you go see a psychologist? Oh, so to find a registered psychologist, visit the BC Psychological Association. You can make an appointment on your own. You don't need a doctor's referral to see a psychologist. Nice!
Understandably, that's exciting. It's one less stop.
So let's click on this, BC Psychologist Association. I gotta find somebody. So now I have to click all of the things that apply to me as an adult. Okay, why am I going to a psychologist? Because I have an anxiety disorder. I don't have depression. I do have OCD. Okay, one of them is just called women's issues. And I would love to know what they mean by women's issues. Stress management. Okay, that seems good. Stress management. No preference. I'm not available weekdays, so I gotta put evenings and weekends because I work a day job. City, town. Victoria. Therapy method, no preference. Yep, I don't care. Psychologist with experience working with nothing. Additional languages spoken, I don't need any of those. Offer services through telehealth. Ooh, that's a thing to think about. I'm going to say yes. Agree to the referral service, information and term of use. Search. Okay. There is one on 4th Street and one near downtown Victoria, Victoria. Okay, it's a weird way to put your address. But let's take a look and see who's who in the zoo. So the first one, he specializes in OCD and veterans. That's cool. And he talks about anxiety disorders. What about this lady? Teach practices such as meditation, relaxation, feeling feelings, managing mind, and intuition work. I am recovered from many issues and use these practices so I am healthy and continue to grow. I'm not sure which one of these I should pick. Maybe I'll just call and whoever gives me an appointment first, I'll go to. Okay, this hasn't been so bad so far. But I'm also terrified to know how much this is going to cost. My fee schedule for new clients as of January 1st. Oh, $225? Okay, well, what's this other person charge? She doesn't say.
That's never a good sign. All right, that was the end of Tamara's search for now. She joins us after making a few calls.
Okay, so no one will take an appointment for me in the next month, basically. And so I'm trying to do this in a way that is specifically recommended through my insurance. And that's really frustrating because if I was in a crisis right now, which is usually when people reach out for therapy, I would be kind of told to sit on my hands and wait. So I'm feeling a little bit irritated by that right now.
Tamara stops and reflects on that and what's available for teachers on a daily basis.
But I guess the other part of it for me is there are literal counselors for the children at school, and I think that's awesome. The children definitely need a counselor. I think that there should be like just a check-in counselor session with educators throughout the school year. I think it's super important. And I don't really know what I'm saying here. I guess I'm irritated because every day I hang out with a licensed counselor and he's the bee's knees. He's super awesome, but he's not there for me. And while he is really a really good friend and a really good listener, he's not there to support me. And I guess I'm kind of asking, like, who is? Like, if I want to get support, I have to go out and seek it and look for it, as opposed to there being a pre-established culture of that. Every day that I have to sit in my classroom alone and eat my sad lunch by myself, I miss going into the crowded staff room and laughing and swapping stories and feeling the camaraderie of like, well, yeah, your grade 4 student mooned your grade 5 student. But I also had a kindergartner tell me today that the world is ending because her mom and dad are moving into a new house. And she thinks that she's not coming with them. And it's like, you know, you don't get that when you're so isolated. It's tough. It's tough trying to keep an even cool when it feels like things underneath you are falling out.
I can't even imagine. Discouraged, Tamara closes her search for the day. She comes back to us, and the material is raw. Tamara's having a panic attack and recording herself as she accesses some resources online.
All right, so this is new for me. I am feeling very anxious and quite panicked, and instead of calling somebody, I am recording myself talking like a lunatic. I am feeling super, super overwhelmed, and like I'm terrible at my job, and if I was actually a good teacher, I would not feel this way. And my students were, they needed a lot of love today, and I didn't run out of love, but oh man, we sure got close. And it's a lot, and it feels like a lot, and ooh. And I don't know what to do. So, we're gonna go on the internet, because I heard there was this website and there was this app called Mindshift. So I'm gonna open it now. And, how are you feeling today, Tamara Nemeth? Not good. Thanks for asking. My anxiety. What are you experiencing? Panic. That one. Oh, panic attacks are sudden and intense rushes of fear marked by strong physical sensation. You got that. Okay, yes, I know all these things. Tips. What? This is nothing. This doesn't help me. Remind yourself about the facts about panic attacks. Listen, if I could remind myself out of my anxiety, I probably would, because I know that this is not a logical train of thinking, and that's one of the most frustrating parts of my anxiety, is that I recognize that it is rational, but I can't make it stop. So we're gonna ground ourselves. Count back slowly from 100. 100. 99. 98, 97. This is going to be the worst audio ever. Okay, let's try something else. Describe your environment in detail. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Oh, grounding. Okay, 5 things you can see. 5 things I can see. I can see my dinosaur light up lamp, my computer, my very cool cheetah print shirt, my Dungeons and Dragons Paladin spellbook cards, and my paper crane that a student made for me. 4 things you can feel. I can feel the coldness of the hardwood and the softer than an egg carton texture of the wall, and my toes, and the side of Matilda's habitat. 3 things I can hear. Not a lot, because I'm in a little room by myself. I can hear the sound of my own voice. I can hear a teeny tiny hum from the light. And I guess I can hear myself breathing. 2 things you can smell: pine and laundry detergent. And 1 thing I can taste. Well, my mouth tastes like fried rice because that's what I was just eating, but Okay, well, I do feel better. I guess that did work. Okay, well, that was my panic. Thanks for being here, whoever's listening.
I felt every bit of that anxiety as it was happening. You could hear it. But I also heard her calm down as it was happening, and that's oddly really satisfying and comforting. I don't know about anyone else, but I spent years talking to people about anxiety management tools and suggesting them, but never actually applying them to myself. Because let's get real, I must be the exception to the species, and those tools are obviously going to work for everyone else but me. I know some of you just smiled, because I think that little belief is way more common than we want to admit. But being there with her while she moved from an anxious state, I definitely recognized to calming down, I felt it work, and that's pretty cool. Okay, we're going to go back to Tamara. We're about to meet somebody very special.
Okay, so I may have a long time before this podcast was even a thing, made a decision to improve my mental health that has drastically improved my mental health. And that is, I have adopted a sweet little animal. And I got myself a sweet little hedgehog. And her name is Matilda. And holy cannoli, does she make me feel better. I feel her breathing while she lies on my chest and has a little nap, and it feels like for a moment the world can turn and I can be here, and that serenity is such a gift right now.
Just listening to Tamara, I can hear how much that's making a difference. I've met Matilda. She is incredibly cute. Tamara signs off and comes back to us the next day.
So I just got home, and I've actually had a pretty great day at work, but I am physically exhausted. Mentally and emotionally, like the kids and I, we did a lot of stuff today. It was good stuff. And so I've got this little nugget in my hands, and she is so perfect, and I already feel 100 times better. And now, like, all I can think about is she costs about the same amount as one therapy session. Which one was a better use of my money?
What do you guys think?
So, Matilda makes me feel quite happy, but I don't think she's going to help so much with my underlying OCD tendencies. So
She brings up a good point. I'm just not really sure if the question is actually whether Matilda was a better investment or a complementary one. As a side note, for those of us who might have had to adapt to some instability or neglect in our families, close relationships can be hard. Developing a safe and loving relationship with a pet can be a really nice way to create a foundation for a secure attachment where you might not have had a lot of opportunity to otherwise. Also, there's something really amazing about caring for and loving another creature while respecting their autonomy. It's really good for us. For me, it's really interesting to think about another thing Tamara brought up. Teachers being there for the students, but no one being there for them, and imagining how isolating that must be. I think she had a really good solution, and I'm sort of surprised no one is already really talking about this. It would do so much to have counseling available, and with everything transitioning online, it's actually pretty doable. It also just seems to me like not having that, it's bad for business. Wouldn't more support for teachers keep burnout levels down? Up next, we have Sierra, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the challenges that she's facing in accessing services with diabetes.
Okay, so I'm starting with a Google search. I'm gonna go to my university's counseling center. Single session telephone and chat-based counseling only. So, or if you're looking for in-person or recurring counseling sessions, we can help direct you to appropriate community-based resources via referral, but these would be paid for out of your own pocket.
Somehow I don't think that's the news Sierra was hoping for.
So that's not overly helpful, other than just like, if you're already in crisis, then like I don't think I would be just looking for this. Like if I was in crisis, I'd probably call a crisis line. If this here to talk thing is supposed to be, for students to talk, but they're connected with a different person every time, you can't build rapport. You're just going to be dealing with the same problems. And honestly, if you're talking to this different people, you're just reliving the trauma over and over again. That's not very helpful, is it?
She's making a really good point. Needing to retell your story and trying to open up and build trust repeatedly can feel like a Herculean effort, let alone jumping into that conversation without building trust and then sharing with a complete stranger. It's exhausting. Like it's a scary thing to call an organization up or sit with someone for the first time, usually on a time limit, and share this really vulnerable stuff. And maybe it's the first time you're thinking about it or admitting it out loud to someone. That's hard. And then needing to repeat that experience. What happens if it doesn't go well? Or someone leaves feeling really unsettled? Okay, back to Sierra. She's looking through more of the website.
So there are additional resources are Support Connect, Vancouver Island Crisis Line, Youth Space for chat and text, and then Here to Talk, which is confidential mental health counseling, community referrals for BC post-secondary students through the app, except it's not, I don't know about all this stuff. Like, I find that, like, chat counseling is not great, like, phone isn't great. I am okay with video. That's okay for me, but like obviously in person would be best.
You're definitely trading a part of the in-person experience up when you move online like that. Sierra's got a pretty relatable preference. It's interesting though, I think an online platform might be sort of promising for some people. An app that you can talk and text on might be something I'd like to try as an extra resource. But on its own, that's definitely not enough for me. I've been doing online and in-person counseling sessions for a year now, and they both have advantages.
But yeah, then for the university website, all there is just like 10 ways to cope with anxiety about COVID-19. Mental health in a global pandemic. Mind control. Managing your mental health during COVID-19. Yeah, I don't know.
The resources are falling kind of short, so Sierra decides to shift gears.
So being type 1 diabetic, I wonder if there's any counseling available that way. Let me take a look. When I look at a big diabetes research nonprofit, nothing comes up.
A bit discouraged, she keeps looking.
I did find one resource here. Yeah, okay, so even with the nonprofit, like I just found an article talking about another type 1 diabetic teenager, although I'm not a teenager, dealing with depression and anxiety caused by the disease, which is extremely normal and natural because your body has shut down and you need to figure out ways to figure it out. And especially if you're worrying about what your blood sugars are, or if you have enough insulin, if you can afford your insulin, can you afford food? Like, that's going to be a lot of anxiety. And then it just has a note that says, feeling depressed, anxious, frustrated, and or overwhelmed living with diabetes? If so, you do not have to face it alone. For information on diabetes counseling, including diabetes self-management and support groups, please contact your healthcare provider for a referral in your area. And that's really fun because when I try to talk to my healthcare provider for a referral, she has told me, well, it seems like your mental health is doing pretty okay. You're stable. You don't need to be followed by a psychiatrist. And I had to go, no. Just because my mood is stable now does not mean that I don't want to be followed by a psychiatrist. That's not how that works. And I had to go back and forth with her quite a few times to actually get the referral. I don't even know if she put it in.
Sierra brings up a lot of really good points and experiences I don't know the first thing about. As a friend, it's frustrating to hear how hard she needs to work to convince people to take her seriously. I don't like that.
I don't understand why the whole process is so confusing, especially like going between Vancouver and Victoria for a lot of years. I was unable to have my records moved over because the health authorities don't talk, even though there's like 2 hours of travel time between it. Like they couldn't fax some forms. So then the psychiatrists or doctors that I was seeing in Vancouver, I couldn't get referred to over here. Or like my current diabetes doctor, I found through a friend of a friend, actually a friend of a friend of my mom, and I basically had to contact her and be like, hey, are you taking new patients? Because the referral from my GP took too long. And I had been without care for a really long time. And that's for like an actual medical, like not that mental health isn't medical, it very much is, but a life-threatening condition. I couldn't get a doctor for it because there, first of all, weren't enough doctors. And second of all, my GP just, I don't know, wouldn't do what I asked her to do. I think this is a problem.
I would agree this is a problem, and she can't be the only one experiencing it and not getting the care she needs. She comes back to reflecting.
I'm kind of left without anything in dealing with a lifelong, chronic, life-threatening illness that is extremely expensive, that the government just barely helps with, barely helps with. And they're expecting us to not only fund all of our medications and fund all this extra stuff for better quality of life, there aren't even any resources to help deal with the aftermath of what if I need my limbs cut off? What if I need this? Like, what if I, like the emotional burden of
diabetes is insane. It's insane. And healthcare providers and politicians and all those other good people don't help. They don't help. And then dealing with surely the financial pressure put on by a chronic, lifelong, life-threatening illness, just the financial burden is enough to cause panic attacks and depression of just the sheer money that you're spending on stuff that you have to throw away. Thinking about how much money I have to spend on stuff that goes in my body that I then just have to throw away. That's wild. That's just wild.
That was a lot she just shared, and a lot to think about. Sierra said something important about retelling your story. I want to reflect on that a little bit more now, because up next we're going to hear from Jo. Throughout the creation of this podcast, Jo was actively confronting her experience with abuse, and she hit a lot of cognitive resistance. Trying to think about and talk about what had happened, we realized, before she was ready, would have done more harm. It was a really slow process, and we were both really surprised. As Sierra said, reliving the trauma, it's not helpful. Telling your story to be heard, especially if there's been a secrecy and a shame around the experience, that can be really powerful. Being bounced around and needing to reshare repeatedly, on the other hand, it's exhausting, and if it's trauma and we have to retell our stories, it can actually be re-traumatizing. That really stands out to me personally. I recently just went through a mental health intake and had to answer 30 minutes of questions. I've been doing this for 10 years, and that was still really upsetting. Jo starts her search on Google, looking up services for victims of abuse in Victoria, BC. After a few minutes, Jo clicks on the first link and is immediately prompted to start filling out a questionnaire. Feeling hopeful, she gets started. She's now been at it for about 20 minutes, has put in her credit card information, and is just realizing that the service she was signing up for was a membership program.
Oh, this is like a membership thing. Right. Okay. So this isn't actually what I'm looking for. Yeah, so this is really interesting. So I'm going to have to cancel my little thing because I'm not looking for a monthly membership to talk to someone. So it seems like a gym thing, which is really weird for a counseling setup. But yeah, so we'll log out of this and go back to the main screen.
She returns to Google, narrowing down her search. Most of what's coming up, though, isn't addressing her needs.
Counseling and support, so that's women's transitional houses, which doesn't apply for me. Ending violence in BC, which is not what I'm looking for. Victoria sexual assault, that's also not what I'm looking for. Child abuse is not what I'm looking for. Domestic violence in women's shelters, that's not really what I'm looking for. Victim Services and Violence Against Women Program Directory, that's not what I'm looking for either. Men's Trauma Center. And the rest are ads. So awesome. So nothing really comes up on Google, which is obviously wildly discouraging. So yeah, so that ends that session. So I'm not actually sure what to look at now, but I might go in a little bit later to the transition house or the domestic violence for Victoria. So neither one of those really apply, but I'm just wondering if there are other resources through those two links that might be helpful. But I'll keep you guys posted.
Jo takes a small break and then comes back to her Google search.
Okay, so I did go and try and just look at the different things on Google that were sort of domestic violence and that sort of thing, and that I think it's really important that it's there. It's just very specific, so it's not, it doesn't apply to what I'm looking for. And so then I just did a quick Google search on as a single parent, and there are some things, but you have to qualify for those programs. So I guess my questions are things like, if somebody's in crisis, besides the crisis line, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of other options for people to go to, which is kind of scary. So yeah, so if you don't have sort of your own support network, I'm not sure what people would do. Yeah, there's an awful lot of like ads or like a group, almost like a gym, where like you tell them and then they like give you a list of therapists that are sort of in your area, and then you can look at reviews and things like that. And so I had a very quick look at that because I think it's a really odd way to do things, but the information that's there is not helpful. So when you're looking at somebody's profile thing, it like just states what they do, so sort of like marriage counseling or that kind of thing. And yeah, so there's like no real bio on the person, so you don't know what kind of therapeutic background they have, you know, like whether they're open to somatic experiencing or if they're doing like cognitive behavioral therapy, or so there isn't a lot of information. So looking at this and not knowing anything about these people, it makes me incredibly apprehensive to reach out to anybody. So the search today has been incredibly discouraging and leaves me not very hopeful about finding somebody to talk to, which is obviously the opposite, I would imagine, of what you would want, right? Like, anyway, so that was that. I had a really quick look, but just Google searching stuff doesn't seem to be helpful at all, or hasn't, for me, been very helpful at all, and has turned out to be eye-opening and a little bit scary. And actually, I'm not sure where to go after this.
Not knowing where to go is a really subtle and big barrier in getting services. What are you supposed to do when you've already taken a risk by trying to search in the first place, and nothing you're looking for is turning up results? Jo tells us she's fairly new to the area and how scary this search feels.
I am fairly new, and out of the 18 months I've been here, 12 of those have been during COVID, so things have been a bit of a nightmare.
She then thinks about the impacts on the community.
So if you were new or struggling, I'm not sure. I would imagine Google is where most people would go initially. So that's really limiting, and that's upsetting.
Jo packs it in and finishes her search for the day. The next afternoon, she receives an email.
So I had an email yesterday from the people that I emailed about the family reunification program, and they were going to pass the information directly on to someone else so that they could get back to me. And it's been 24 hours and there's no response. And this is from my experience, this is a pretty typical thing on the island. It takes a while for people to get back to you, which is incredibly frustrating. Incredibly frustrating. So exciting that I did get an email. They acknowledged that they got mine and have transferred that over. And so now it's just a waiting game. So I'll keep going, and I'm going to start my Google search for counseling for people who have been in emotionally and financially abusive relationships.
It's been several days of research and contacting different organizations, and Jo comes back to us.
So I have spent the last couple of days chasing down the counseling services again for family reunification. It turns out that there is one body on the island that does this type of counseling, which is insane.
I know I'm not really supposed to have an opinion, but my mouth dropped when I heard that. There's only one organization in town.
Their waitlist is 4 to 5 months. So again, unless you have a ridiculous amount of money hanging out in your back pocket, and well, in this case, actually, even if you do, it doesn't matter, right? The wait list is ridiculously long, which is incredibly frustrating, given the crisis stuff that is happening at the moment in this scenario. So that's incredibly frustrating and wildly discouraging that there's only one body on the entire island that looks after this kind of thing. That seems really disproportionate to the need that is out there. There are, or at least I'm hoping there are other things on the mainland, which I am still waiting to hear back from. The one person, it has been 2 weeks and I haven't heard anything. So I've just reached out to see if there are other things on the mainland, but that of course involves mass expense. So again, if you do not have a great deal of money, which is the case for me, then you're sort of SOL, which is wildly scary.
That's a really powerful point. Jo needs support and is trying to access it and can't. She's in a gap, and this is the case for so many people. It's already hard enough to mentally grapple with the reality of being a survivor of abuse. To start finally looking for support and find out it has to be so bad that things have come to a physical state, this doesn't make any sense.
Families are clearly struggling, and there just aren't the resources out there to address all kinds of things. And again, it's about, you know, if you are not in absolute dire straits or being physically assaulted, then there isn't a lot of help for you, which is also insane because, you don't have to be in that situation to be really struggling.
She's right. What Jo shares next, the first time I heard it, made my heart stop.
So just as a follow-up, I just got off the phone with one of the organizations that, actually the only organization that I was referred to via victim services, and they're for counseling. They do have group stuff available, but their individual counseling waiting list, because this one I believe is quite unique in that it's structured for specifically victims of abuse. Their waiting list is 10 months. Which is insane. That I nearly fell over actually when she told me that. So their group is sort of like a drop-in thing, and obviously via Zoom with COVID, and that doesn't have a waiting list, but the actual counselling has a massive waiting list. So I put my name down for that. It's 20 sessions that are free, which obviously is why the wait list is so long. But that's still absolutely unacceptable, and just so shocking and very scary. So if you are in crisis around this, like they can't do anything for you. They can't help you. And so once again, right, in the West Shore in Victoria and on the island, you're kind of on your own, like to find resources and things like that. So that's wildly concerning. So I'm on a wait list. I have 10 months in which, I guess I just keep like pushing through to find another place that can help me sort through all of the it's the emotional stuff. It's all the emotional stuff that's coming forward. So but I thought that was quite important to highlight, and so that's what I'm doing. So I am feeling I think actually I'm in shock at the moment. I find that just absolutely unbelievable, and I'm like shocked, frustrated, discouraged, angry, and really sad. That makes me really sad, not just for myself, obviously, but other people who are searching for supports, who are in this scenario. I don't think that that's an acceptable waiting period at all. So I'll keep looking.
Thanks for joining us this episode as Tamara, Sierra, and Jo tried their best to sort out how to access mental health services. I think many of us have been where they are, frustrated and struggling. Knowing that they had a group of people to talk to made the process easier, and was one of the ways we were able to keep that frustration from becoming a barrier to access moving forward. The reality is that frustration is a much bigger barrier than most of us realize. David used to say that learning happened in 4 stages, like riding a bike. The first stage, you don't know that you don't know how to ride a bike, because you're probably not even aware that they exist. The second stage, you become aware that you don't know how to ride a bike because you're trying to figure it out and learn for the first time, and it's hard. The third stage, you figured out how to ride the bike and you're even good at it. The fourth stage, you can't remember that at some point you didn't know how to ride the bike. Trying to figure out how to care for your mental health can be like these stages of learning how to ride a bike. Trying to figure out how to do anything for the first time is hard. People usually give up in that second stage. When it comes to mental health, being alone and struggling to sort out what to do, it's enough to make a lot of us give up. But unlike riding a bike, you can't really just drop mental health issues. They're not something you can put aside. And if you can't figure out how to start that process, you really have to find a way to manage the symptoms that are coming up. And that becomes a whole other area of conversation that as a society we pretend doesn't exist. Now, I know our episode is ending and we haven't touched on this, but I'm going to talk about it quickly now before we sign off for the day. One of the ways people sometimes choose to manage their symptoms can be through substance use. Not recreationally, but literally as a relief from emotional and psychological pain. I think that there's a huge misconception about people when it comes to managing those symptoms with substances because there's almost a gaslighting that happens. We're really clear that physical health symptoms need support, but mental and emotional struggles, they almost get written off. Like there's some kind of societal myth that they either aren't real or if you're really healthy that you can just ignore them away. Substances can often end up being used because they're easier to access and often, truthfully, more affordable than the services people need to make concrete changes. We manage our symptoms with resources that are accessible to us, and then we're shamed, or the truth of the fact that we can't get what we need is completely ignored when people are casting judgment on our choices. And this isn't a comment on the use of substances. It's a comment on the lack of financial support to accessing other resources and the lack of honesty and awareness in the public conversation around mental health and substance use. When babies are first crawling and learning to walk, we get really excited, right? We cheer them on, we watch their moves super closely, and when they waver or fall, we encourage them to get back up. We need this kind of support from each other, especially with stuff like mental health. There is so much stigma and shame around our experiences openly, asking for support and accessing services. We need community, and that support makes a huge difference. Believing and feeling like other people are there with you and for you can bring down some of the symptoms mental health struggles bring on. That support can literally break down feelings of isolation and helplessness. We start to feel cared for, and that can do big things for our motivation and our self-worth. So in episode 3, you're going to hear how Becca and Natasha got inspired by what we were doing and the support we were able to give each other to go out and access some services for themselves. We all got a little bit more vulnerable. Doing something new together can really bring that out in people. Join us next episode when we get honest about what stops us from accessing mental health services.
I think it's just like we're only in the beginning stages of the conversation of like, we need to talk more about mental health. Okay, I think we've talked a lot about mental health. We're there. We're here. We're there. Okay, now we need the resources. Now we need things that we can actually do. So we've acknowledged mental health as an issue.